Good afternoon. I'm John Cinnamon, and on behalf of the Indiana Broadcast Pioneers and the Indiana Broadcasters Association, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Indiana Broadcasters Hall of Fame Spotlight. This is the first in what we expect to be a series of online broadcasts where we'll catch up with inductees of the Indiana Broadcasters Association Hall of Fame. They'll share a favorite story from their broadcast career and perhaps answer a few of your questions. You can enter those questions in the comment section there, and we'll answer those as time allows. This week's guest was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2014. If you grew up listening to the radio in central Indiana in the 1970s and early 80s, there's a pretty good chance you started your day listening to Cris Connor on the WNAP morning show. But what got Cris into radio in the first place? Here's how he tells it. It was while working as a grease monkey at a Standard Oil gas station in South Haven, Michigan in 1963 that Cris Connor first got the idea that radio could be his salvation from living the life of the mundane. Radio station WLS in Chicago was beaming commercials into South Haven about how a career in radio could make you rich and a star. Grease monkey to disc jockey in a matter of 13 weeks. Chris's immediate response, is this a great country or what? And so the journey began. And so begins this Indiana Broadcasters Hall of Fame Spotlight with Cris Connor. Cris, I believe you wanted to start today with a story about what you call an invisible Corvette, an Indy 500 pace car.
I have things I wrote down as housekeeping, if you don't mind. Happy belated birthday to Tammy Lively. Kudos to Debbie Knox, looking real good, girl, as you did the CBS anchor job this past week. To Roger Penske, bring the zoom zoom, dude. October is good. To David Munchenberger over there in Dinkytown, I'm sorry I said that about you on Facebook, but you know it's true. And finally, Mom, I hope I don't embarrass you today, and I won't be telling of the incident that took place at Fast Freddy Fever's house. Oh, the invisible Corvette?
Yeah.
Okay. As you know, in the pace cars every year, they get sold at the end of the month of May. Mm-hmm. We had a salesman at the radio station who bought one of those 33 cars. And he decided that he wouldn't really put insurance on it. He could park it in his garage. He'd only drive it occasionally. He had a second car. And he would just switch the plates from the legal car to the Corvette. Well, you have a car like this, you really do drive it a lot. He kept on driving the car. We went to a softball game one night. Woody was his name. He was a top billing salesman. He was just great. And he was kind of like Herb Tarlek. You know, he dressed real flashy and did all the things. Well, I think Herb was actually modeled on him on WKRP, but we had a softball game. Usually after a softball game, we retire to a bar and both teams get together, and the rest of the night was spent partying hard. During the time we're in the bar, Woody says, I need to go outside and have a smoke. So I said, okay, I'll go with you. We walk out. No Corvette. Gone. No insurance. The invisible Corvette.
Never to be seen
If it could
again?
happen in radio, John, it would happen. You know that.
Wow. And did anyone ever pay the price, get in trouble, do time?
Never saw it again. It was just crazy. Never saw it. He was out. And I think he just maybe this year might have paid it off.
All right. So let's think back to your days at WNAP doing the morning show, and sort of fast forward to today. Given what some would say is the hyper PC culture, could you see you doing what you were doing back in the 70s? Would that fly today? And would you do your show differently, if at all?
I could see it flying today. You might have to approach some topics a little bit differently, but as you know, back then we were pretty outspoken and kind of give a damn Jones, you know, and the way we programmed ourselves. But we had a rule at the station, and that was never do anything that would embarrass Mr. Fairbanks, who was the owner. And if you operated under that guys, you were good, and you didn't get a lot of static.
Okay. Well, back in those days, back in the WNAP days, you had some cohorts that are going to join us today, special guests. We're calling it a reunion, more than 40 years in the making. The other two members of the original WNAP morning team, Bruce Munson and Tom Cochran. Bruce and Tom have provided their own short bios, and Cris has provided their pictures. After leaving WNAP, Bruce Munson built, ran, and sold a couple of cable TV systems, became a lawyer, and served 5 terms in the Indiana House of Representatives. He has 4 children and 5 grandchildren. He has written and hopes to publish 2 novels and is 2/3 of the way through an original movie screenplay. Tom Cochran is a member, as Cris is, of the Indiana Broadcasters Association Hall of Fame, and was a member of the original WNAP morning team. He was an Emmy-winning investigative reporter, news anchor, news director, and president and CEO of a television and media production company. He's the author of 2 published novels and a member of the Indiana Journalism Hall of Fame. So without further ado, please welcome Bruce Munson and Tom Cochran. Guys, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
John, thank you. And Cris, congratulations. Welcome to the Hall of Fame.
Thank you, Tom. It's good seeing you. We should mention that you're out on the West Coast now. As a matter of fact, you could trip and fall into the ocean, I think.
Yeah, a couple of steps.
So, Cris.
By the way, Bruce, you might want to get with Tom after this and see if you can hook up with his publishers to get those novels of yours.
I might. Cris, by the standard you mentioned, don't embarrass Mr. Fairbanks. Could we still do the derriere derby today or not? Just a rhetorical.
In retrospect, I'm not sure how we got away with it then.
I wonder how we got away with
the derriere derby. Would you like to? Can we describe that to the audience?
Well, yeah. A record company wanted to put on a show out at the state fairgrounds for the crowd, and it was, I believe it was car show, motorhead kind of a get together that 50,000 people might be there at any given time over the weekend. And so he thought to entertain the crowd that we would have a contest, and hence the derriere derby, which was who had the nicest butt. And it was men, women, everything was good. And there were some great prizes, and I got to MC it. So I'd go out on the stage and do it. The first year it was great. Second year, the crowd was even bigger. They decided to move the time of the derriere derby, which was just around lunchtime the year before, into about 5 or 6 o'clock at night. Well, by that time, everybody's rip-roaring and ready to go. So I go out, and we always thought, well, we start with the men first, because get them out of the way. And then the real draw was the ladies. So I go out and I say, well, first we're going to bring out the men. And they start booing, and they were raising all kinds of hell. And I see something flash by my face real fast. And I looked behind me at the judges, and it was a loaded beer thrown from the crowd. So I turn around and look, and I said, okay, well, this won't take very long. Another one. That was when the promoter said, maybe we need to back off here. We actually had to cancel it, the third event that we had. So,
but it was
derriere
fun while it lasted. Bruce, let me come to you. Let's go back to the 70s. What is your recollection of the first time meeting Cris and joining the WNAP team?
Check. My recollection is that I'm not even sure it was the 70s. It might have been late 1969. If it wasn't, it was early 1970. You got to realize I'm still in high school. And to me, Cris Connor, my view of Cris Connor is comparable to pick a kid in England, a guitar student in 1964. To me, Cris Connor was a Beatle, okay? But somehow I finagled my way into the NAP Air Studio. It was my second trip there. Before that, I made a trip once and visited with Mike Griffin, who could not have been more cordial. Same is true of Cris. Cris was in that hole in the wall studio. It's hard to describe the physical configuration, but it's a room in the back of the building on Illinois Street, the legendary two-story brick on North Illinois. It's a room that used to house automation equipment for WNAP's predecessor, which was WIBC FM, which I believe had some kind of a beautiful music format, aired off of large reels of tape. One day the tape ran out early and there were no phone calls. Nobody noticed that there was no sound going out over the airwaves. So NAP cleared that room out, put an air studio in there, introduced the concept of rock and roll to FM at a time when most people thought it was illegal to play rock and roll on FM. And Cris was the night shift guy in those days. And he was accompanied by an Afghan hound named Kalu and props that included a gong that he would bang periodically. And I was awestruck, and I made it my mission in life to work there. And I ended up doing that somehow. And of course, human nature being what it is, you always think there's greener grass somewhere else. I always thought, well, there's got to be more to life than this. So I did other things. I got a law degree. I served in the legislature, but it's taken me 30 plus years to realize I had it right the first time. That's why it hasn't gotten better than that. And I don't know that it could. So anyway, now.
All right. Tom, let me come to you.
Now I'm not hearing.
Now,
bear with me.
Tom,
ignore. This is me talking to my phone. I'm going to power it down.
Tom, you came to WNAP as kind of the hard news guy, right? You were just down the hall at WIBC. Now, did you feel like you were going to be the adult in the room doing straight news, or were you prepared to be part of the freewheeling atmosphere?
Well, let me tell you, first, I was a fan of WNAP. I was still working at a little radio station in Muncie. Lana and I were married in the spring of 1969, and we spent the spring and summer in Europe. And we came back from Europe, and I was still working in Muncie, but we had taken an apartment in Indianapolis. So I would make that drive to Muncie and back in the evening, and I would listen to Naptown's Nighttime Baby Driver, King Free, Moto Groove. And I absolutely fell in love with this guy on the radio. Had never met him, but I too was a fan. In September of '69, the fellow who filled in for me while I was in Europe was a young man named David Letterman. And he got a call from Fred Heckman, who said, I hear there's a good young newsman in Muncie, and would you like to come to Indianapolis? And David said, well, that's not me, but when he gets back, I'll tell him about you. And so in September of '69, I was hired by Fred, and that was a big news powerhouse, as you know. But down the hall in the back of the building were the guys that were having a lot of fun, including the people that I would listen to. And they needed to have a news presence. And so Mike Griffin and I started in the morning. I was doing the news, and Griff was on in the morning. And then eventually the morning team evolved. And so I never really felt like I was the adult in the room, but I was the guy that brought a little bit of reality into the mix. But it was a great time because we were given carte blanche. Have fun. Don't embarrass Mr. Fairbanks in the office next to the carpeted office, but be inventive and be creative. And that's what we did. And, I think we added spice to people's lives in those days. And our goal was to become sort of as comfortable as an old pair of shoes or a pair of blue jeans that you just sort of fit into. And I think that happened. And we had a great relationship with the people who listened to us.
Cris, in your Hall of Fame induction speech back in 2014, which, by the way, folks can see on YouTube, just search for Cris Conner Hall of Fame induction speech. You'll find it there. You actually referred to Tom as the voice of reason. Is that was that also your kind of attitude about Tom? Did you feel like you needed a voice of reason in the studio at that time?
We actually we did so much imaging with that radio station. Things when the company first bought a traffic helicopter, for instance, there was no traffic in Indianapolis. There was no need for that, but it gave the image of the station a much larger presence. And eventually, of course, we found that the population grew and we do need traffic copters and that sort of thing. But we did a lot of imaging, and that was with respect to WNAP, we did need a reasonable person in that mix that people could actually say, well, yeah, I can get information from this fun radio station, in the form of Tom being an essential part of this morning show. And when I was offered the morning show, I just wasn't a morning person. And I told the management, I said, I can't do this. I won't do this unless I have people in that room with me. Hence, Tom and Bruce and some of the other people who came to be a part of that morning show, including David Letterman and other characters that we've come to know. Rex Rona, of course, being one of them. But
where is Rex? Where is Rex these days?
Tom and I actually had a show to serve the public interest requirements of the radio station every Sunday called WNAP Rap. And we would use that time to talk about community events and community happenings that would fulfill our requirements to the FCC. And Tom was the one who came up with that and produced it, and that did a lot for us.
We actually broke the program down, John. We would take interviews with fascinating people, some who were transiting through Indianapolis, celebrities, scientists, just a whole panoply of people. And we would break it down into little 3.5-minute segments. And we used to always start, we were talking about, and we would join a conversation we thought you might like to know. And we did that throughout the week. And it's amazing to me. A couple of years ago, I had a fella call me on the phone, and he had been a bus driver in Indianapolis. And he said, my wife and I are going to actually be out on your part of the state. Would you like to have lunch? So we went out and we sat out and had lunch, and he started talking about some of these NAP rap programs that honestly I had forgotten about.
It is amazing. I think we all have that experience of meeting listeners years later that bring up something that perhaps you had forgotten about, and it sets off a light bulb. Oh yeah, I remember doing that. Cris, you mentioned again something else that you mentioned in your Hall of Fame speech. You pointed out Roy Cooper, who I believe was the GM at the time, doing everything that he could to keep your license from being revoked. Can you mention maybe one or two things that might have stretched the limits of broadcast at the time? Or maybe Bruce has a better story.
Well,
go ahead.
We did so many things that were questionable. We did radar reports where police were setting up radar. We would tell the people on the air. The police department called and they were going, what's up with this? Why are you doing this? And of course, we had management that backed us and let us fly with it. But we would, early on, we also had a thing. I had a pitch on my program that was called the Ride Line. And if you were, back in the 70s, if you were hitchhiking someplace, we would hook you up with rides. And you think about that today and you go, holy wow, what is the liability in that? We did a lot of things back then that were, the liability was questionable.
That was Uber. You invented Uber.
We could not do a rap today. We could not do one of the most fun events
the rap race
in the history of Indiana radio. We could not do this because of the liability. And that's sad, but that, we're in a libelous world today. Excuse me, Bruce, but we are. And a lot of the things we did back then now, absolutely not. We could not do that without risking not only our license, but our entire.
Do you lads remember the day that it was when we were playing around with the concept of free money, and it was the middle of a thunderstorm, and I think it was a late spring, early summer thunderstorm. You know what it's like. Lightning is just racking down out of the sky, and the rain is pelting. We go up on the roof, and we tell people if they come and get out of their cars, we will throw them free money on records. And we did, and they did. And the police finally had to come and stop us because we had created a traffic jam, not only on North Illinois, but around on Meridian Street. Plus, we were endangering lives.
We would, I don't know if you mentioned that, Tom, but we would tape the money to albums and throw the albums off of the building as well. And you think about that, and you're throwing this piece of vinyl about an eighth of an inch, and people are racing and running over each other to catch.
It'll take somebody's head off.
Projectiles in the public can be a dangerous combination.
It sounds like, Cris, that you work from the premise of you'd rather beg forgiveness than ask permission. Was that pretty much the case?
Absolutely. Do it until you get the cease and desist order.
One quick comment from one of the viewers here on Facebook. It's Bruce, not you, Bruce. This is another Bruce, said, for a kid growing up in Anderson, listening with a J.C. Penney receiver connected to a coat hanger, you guys made my every morning. Love you guys.
Thank you.
That's
That's
nice
terrific.
to hear that kind of thing. It really is. Cris,
Go ahead, Bruce.
that's the thing about digital media. You can't interrupt anymore the way you used to be able to because of the way the audio is processed. I remember being somewhere, and it may well have been with either or both of you, Tom and Cris, but it was a downtown Indianapolis restaurant. We were being our usual humble, unassuming selves, and somebody comes up and knows who we are based on our voices. Do you remember that? I can't tell you when or exactly where, but I remember that it happened.
There was an intimacy. There really was. And I don't know that that's still alive in radio, but people depended upon you at certain points in their day. you were just part of their life. You were like that cup of orange juice or cup of coffee in the morning. And so people did pay attention. And if you were out, they would recognize you, not because we were broadcasting pictures, but they heard us. They heard our personalities.
Yeah,
and I think there was
Tom, since you sort of brought up the intimacy of radio and what radio was like, I'll circle back to the question that I asked Cris about. What is your impression? What do you think of radio today as a medium for being intimate, the way it was back when you were on the morning show with Cris and Bruce?
There is it's a different world. Our expectations as consumers are entirely different. I think podcasts are, if you will, kind of an attempt to reach that kind of one-on-one intimacy that we used to maybe shoot for when we were on the air. Of course, we were broadcasting to thousands of people, but we always felt as though we were talking to friends or people that we knew. It was more of a one-on-one conversation. When the personality sort of got eroded out of radio and it became more of a technology and a machine, that personality went away. I think what a lot of podcasters today are doing are sort of going back and capturing that lightning that was in the bottle when we were doing radio back in those days.
Bruce, do you want to weigh in on the state of radio today? And
do they still do it? I shouldn't talk that way. I have some good friends in the business, and somehow it's remained alive, but it sure ain't what it used to be. And whether it ever will be, I don't know. There are so many options now for the use of people's time and senses that I just can't imagine trying to do it once again.
Here is a question from a viewer today. Steve Reynolds. Do we know a Steve Reynolds?
No one here will admit it. Nope. Never heard of him. Never heard of them.
He says, what about the Hi-Fi Buys ping pong balls with prizes? Who wants to feel that?
I guess that kind of formal.
Can we put him on and let him tell it? Or
I am afraid not. We do not have the technology.
Well, then that. somebody with a better memory than mine will have to speak to it.
Go ahead, Cris.
Okay. Little Stevie. Hi-Fi Buys, big stereo outfit in Indianapolis. Everybody in central Indiana knows of Hi-Fi Buys, but they would have a yearly sale where everything was really discounted. It was held at the convention center downtown, and the salesman with the Corvette, Woody.
Yeah, Woody.
This is another Woody event. Woody came up with the idea that he could get a generator, hook up a size of plastic hose, and blow ping pong balls out of it with tickets inside the ping pong balls for various discounts for the equipment inside, additional to the prices that were already low. So we held it out in the parking lot of the convention center, and he had hired all the equipment, the guys to run it and everything coming in. But of course, they had never tested it. So I have all these ping pong balls in there. You've got 3,000 people in a restricted area that once the balls come out, you can come in and get one. And in theory, these balls would just be going everywhere. Well, we fire it up and they're just kind of dribbling out into the parking lot and they're not going anywhere. And everybody charged these ping pong balls. And melee is a understatement. Freddie remembers, this is Freddie Fever who's calling in if anybody wants to know. And Freddie, of course, is the guy who sees a young kid walking into the convention center after this is all over, and he's got a huge black boot print on the back of his T-shirt.
They live to tell the tale.
I've got there's a piece about Freddie that goes to the morning team as well. We started doing on Friday mornings a wine taste, and we had people come in and they were experts in wine, and we were not necessarily wine drinkers in those days.
What
And
could possibly go wrong?
They introduced us to wine. So at 9 o'clock in the morning, we are tasting wine. Well, it became sort of an event. All of the sales department and some other staff people would start coming in. And so maybe by 10:30, everybody's had a lot of wine. Well, we decided this is a great idea. So we moved it to a noonday event, and we invited people, 93, what was it, Chris? 93 women would come and they would have a wine taste. Well, at one of these events, Chris and I are there, and we're talking to some people, and Freddie came up, and there were 3 women with him, and they had been drinking wine copiously, and Freddie says, "We're all going to go take a shower."
Incorrigible.
And a word of kind of a word of kindness about Woody. Woody was a dynamic salesman, and he was a character. Chris and I did this now infamous survival week where we went down to a lake in southern Indiana, and they had gone to Pat Gallion at Gallions, and Pat gave us all the state-of-the-art camping gear and whatever you could have. Bruce drew the short straw and stayed back in the studio and ran the board. And Chris and I were down there left on our own in the woods with all this gear, and Woody would show up every night with steaks and beer. That was our survival week.
Oh,
great gig. Let's see. We do have a question here from Dave Fulton. He says, what do you think a radio station today would have to do with programming and personality to recreate the lightning in a bottle that was WNAP?
Get a large amount of cash and call Tom and Bruce and I right now.
And listen to what
I'll let you know if it rings, fellas.
Tom, there's a very nice comment here from someone. They say, Chip J. Black says, loved Tom Cochran's morning news and stories. He painted beautiful word pictures. So that's very nice. And well, frankly, as we all know, that's what radio was all about. It was
Absolutely.
It was theater of the mind. You had to create things that you had to paint that picture, or I'm sure in many cases, Chris, you created things that weren't really there.
I think maybe you're referring to Fantasy Park, which we put on the air. There were a lot of, back in the 70s when live albums started to emerge and were getting airplay on radio stations such as WNAP, we devised, we came up with an idea to have a live rock concert featuring all of the famous people in rock at that time, and devise a way to have a on air sounding like we were broadcasting from a park, from a venue. And we called it Fantasy Park Theater of the Mind. We took all the live albums. We were in the studio, and we would say, on stage B, we have Jimi Hendrix, and announce him and bring him on. And we had sound effects, the crowd would be roaring and everything. And when the album was finished, we would flow into another live album over on stage A. And we said, we're sorry that we're at capacity already and you can't get in. Please just listen on the radio. And of course that, doesn't make any difference. There was Woodstock before that. So everybody was piling in their cars and heading down to the north side of Indianapolis looking for this big concert going on. We had
They wanted to see They wanted to see how we brought Jimi Hendrix back to life.
Yes.
And he wasn't the only. Being dead didn't keep anybody off that stage. He wasn't the only
But it
no
was,
longer living artist.
again, painting pictures. People actually thought this was a deal, and they had to get there.
That's
They
true.
didn't hear theater of the mind. They just knew something
Mhm.
big was going on in Indianapolis, and that's where we're going. It was great fun.
John, we did something beyond after that was sort of built on that foundation. It was called 2093, where we created an Indianapolis in the year 2093. There was a piece of audio technology. I think it was called a harmonizer. Was that
Yes.
the Chris,
Yeah.
the harmonizer? And you could break the voice down and do all kinds of interesting things with it. And so we created a
I think we're
cast
getting a
of
little bit of a
characters.
taste of it right now.
Yeah, right. But you could harmonize the voice, and so we had a set of characters, and we were. It was probably based on the whole Star Wars phenomena, but we created the city of the future, and we were only going to do it for a few hours. And the boss, the man in the carpeted office, said, "This is great." So we did it. What, another day and a half before
We had
finally
to
just
find material for another day and a half. We had to write commercials as they would have been in 2093. We had to come up with a whole lot of the crew, the whole station. They just came together and they started writing and creating material that we could sustain another 48 hours worth. And it was a fantastic melding of people within the radio station, secretaries, everything. It was just fantastic. And yeah, it was another event that is well remembered.
extraordinary moment.
Yeah.
These are great, great memories from all of you, and I think we don't necessarily want to wear out our welcome here on Facebook and the Indiana Broadcast Pioneers page. So I think this is all the time we'll give this today. Tom, Bruce, thank you so much for joining us today. Any Tom, I'll start with you. Any final words?
Well, I
sign off?
appreciate staying in touch with Indiana through the Broadcast Pioneers and the Indiana Broadcast Association. It's great of them to make this available to everybody and to us so we could relive some memories again. But it is a way to stay in touch with what was a magical time in my life.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Yes,
Thanks for being
indeed.
here. Bruce, what would you like to sign off with today?
Well, primarily with a big thank you to you, John, because you had the tough job in all of this, coordinating it, putting it together, and you did a splendid job with it, and I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it very much. Enjoyed a chance to visit with Tom and Chris in one place, which certainly hasn't happened in a lot. I can't tell you when I don't know if it's happened in 40 years, but thanks to your skills, John. Well,
I want to bring Tom back in here for just 1 second, because this is you sort of brought up a point there, Bruce. This is a virtual studio, obviously.
Yeah.
When was the last time you three were in a studio? Was it WNAP? Was it 40 years ago?
Probably.
Or more?
I can't think of an occasion.
It was.
If it was after, it escapes me. Yeah.
It may have been that long ago. Yep.
Right.
I think so. Remarkable.
Amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Bruce, Tom, again, thank you for making
John,
this
thank you.
a special day for Chris.
Thank you, John.
And we'll see you again soon. Chris, thank you for being our first honoree for the Indiana Broadcasters Hall of Fame Spotlight.
John, thank you. As always, it should be noted that you and your lovely wife, Ann Craig, another huge part of WNAP, are close friends, lifetime friends in broadcasting. I'd like to thank the IBA. The IBA, as you know, was originally funded by the Fairbanks Foundation. And Mr. Fairbanks played a huge role as he bankrolled everything that we did at WNAP. And thanks to everybody who it's just fantastic that all these years we still have all of you out there who remember us and speak nicely of us. We could not have done it without you. You were the reason we achieved all of the things that we did. And so with that, John, thanks again for having me. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Cris. Thanks for being a part of it. Have a good day. And thank all of you for joining us today for the first Indiana Broadcasters Hall of Fame Spotlight. A recording of this will be available here on the Indiana Broadcasters Pioneers page soon, so you can watch it again, share it with your friends who couldn't see it today. Be sure to like and follow the Indiana Broadcast Pioneers page for updates on upcoming Hall of Fame spotlights. For the Indiana Broadcast Pioneers and the Indiana Broadcasters Association, I'm John Cinnamon. Thanks for watching.